I was born in Flint, Michigan, moved down to Tennessee when I was 12, and uh, went through the apprenticeship here pretty late in life. And my dad had been IBEW for ever, and it's changed my life. It's changed my life. No, always been here, and I went in August of 2018. So that that's 7 years in August. So I did go through the apprenticeship here in 429 and topped out there. Um, what was my experience? It was difficult. Um, the first year I had to make myself get out of bed and go to work because it was hard. I didn't, I went in knowing nothing. I was green as green could be, and I was older. And I ran into a lot of resistance on that job, but I am very stubborn. And so that first year was tough. Second year was a little easier. Third year it got easier throughout the apprenticeship as I learned, and as I learned how to deal with things. Now there was that first job. There was no steward on that job, and I didn't know enough to know that that was actually a problem. And now I know. I think every job I've had since has had a steward. But as a first year, I knew nothing. Even though my dad had been in, I knew very little. So the more you learn, the easier it gets. And that's learning both the trade, the craft, and the particular society that our trade kind of develops. My first contractor was actually as a pre-apprentice. It was a very short call, and it was Besco, which is now Superior. It was Besco out at the base, um, and then my second one was Lawson, and then my third one was Besco again, and then Rosenden, and then Superior, which of course took over uh, Besco. I mean, I think I learned something on all of them. Pretty much from Lawson, I learned I don't want to work for Lawson again. But the others, and so there's a lot of contractors that I have not worked for yet. I mean, I have not worked for Conti or Maryland, Gephardt, VEC. I haven't worked for those. Worked only for a few. Um, all of them have, and I was at Lawson in the very beginning. So they were just also dealing with someone who just knew nothing, nothing, nothing. So there was that. I do think that it is. The second time, there was a second time in the local that I did not have at first a steward, and that was out at TVA under Mass. And that was starting to get really bad um, without a steward. But they did get one, and they do have one now. That the original steward is not there, but someone else is. It's important to have a steward on the job. People have to have someone to go to if there's an issue. Um, it's that has been and when I've traveled, I've seen stewards that seem to be more active than some of the stewards we've had here, but that may just be a culture thing. Every local is different. I have traveled. I topped out last year, and I was working at Superior, and that was ramping down. And I dragged up, and I went to Pembroke, Kentucky. That was in the 816, and that was a very good experience. Um, and then they laid everybody off because, and it hasn't even started back up, I don't guess. That was going to be a battery recycling plant, and I'm not sure what happened. It just stopped. So then from there, I went on to Blue Oval in Kentucky, out of the 369. And then I went to Pennsylvania. Real good experience in Pennsylvania. That was out of the 163. And then I came back and worked for Mass out at TVA, and then left there to go to Fort Wayne, Indiana, 305. Fantastic experience up there. They'll be gearing back up in June when building 2 and 3 get going. But at every place I've been, I think I've learned more about how, what some locals are doing that we could be incorporating, what they do better, maybe what they don't do as well. And and it's important to know that things can change for the better. We can do better. We can include more people. We can be more inclusive. We can take care of our men better and our women. And we can make sure that our apprentices are well taken care of, because that is important. That is extremely important. And that means keeping our finger on the pulse of how everyone is advancing and that they are being used meaningfully, so that you don't have someone sitting for 3 years in a material crib, right? And so this is critical, and it's critical that apprentices understand that they are members. They do have a say. They do have some power, and they will eventually, be the JWs, and so I've seen apprentices in other locals that they're being watched very carefully to make sure that they are learning what they need to know. They're not just kind of thrown out there and then, hopefully they fight their way into being able to learn things. There was a young man at the last job in Fort Wayne, and he had a master's degree. He was as lost as could be out there, and I was like, I'm not gonna let you do meaningless work. If you're working with me, you're gonna do meaningful work. And by the time I left, his anxiety had gone down considerably. The idea that making apprentices anxious accomplishes anything is ridiculous. People don't learn when they're anxious. People learn when they're relaxed. And so there's a little bit of an ethos that probably needs changing in this trade.